been practicing his lines for 11 weeks. I know it was 11 weeks because I have the sticky note still, the one he made me tape to the refrigerator the morning his teacher called to say he'd gotten the part. He wrote it himself in orange crayon, a 7-year-old's handwriting, big and lopsided, and it said, 109 days until the show. He crossed off each day before breakfast, every single morning. I'd hear him pad into the kitchen in his socks, uncap the marker, make one deliberate X, and then stand there counting the remaining boxes under his breath like he was calculating something important. His name is Theo. He's 7, and he has his father's dark eyes and this way of concentrating on things that makes him look 40 years old. When his second-grade teacher, Ms. Poming, Kellerman, called to tell me he'd been cast as the lead in the spring musical, a retelling of Stone Soup, of all things, he didn't jump around or yell. He just sat down on the kitchen floor, cross-legged, and said, very quietly, I need to start learning the words now. So that's what he did. He practiced in the bathtub. He practiced in the car. He practiced at the dinner table until I had to tell him that we needed to have actual conversations sometimes. And he looked at me with this completely reasonable expression and said, this is a conversation. I'm telling you about the soup. I didn't have the heart to argue. His father, Eli, recorded him on his phone probably 40 or 50 times over those 11 weeks. Little clips of Theo in his pajamas running through the scene where the villagers finally gather around the pot. His arms spread wide, his voice carrying through the whole first floor of our house. The show was scheduled for a Friday night in May, 7 o'clock. Lincoln Elementary School gymnasium, folding chairs, hand-painted backdrop, the whole thing. My sister-in-law booked her daughter's birthday party for the same night 6 weeks before the show. Same time. 40 minutes away. I want to be careful about how I tell this part because I've told it so many times in my head that I've smoothed out the edges, and I don't want it to sound smoother than it was. When I first heard about it, I genuinely thought it was an accident. My husband's sister, I'll call her what Theo calls her, which is Aunt Bree, though her real name is Brianna, told us at Sunday dinner that she'd locked in a venue for my niece Piper's 6th birthday. She was excited. She'd gotten a party room at one of those indoor trampoline places, the kind with foam pits and arcade games, and she'd already sent invitations to 12 kids from Piper's kindergarten class. It sounded wonderful. Then she told us the date. I felt Eli go still next to me. I put down my fork. That's the night of Theo's show, I said. She waved her hand. Not dismissively, I told myself, she was gesturing. Oh, it's just a school play. He's the lead, Eli said. He's been practicing since February. I know, she said, and she smiled at Theo, who was sitting right there eating his macaroni and cheese. And I'm sure you're going to be amazing, buddy. But the venue only had that slot available, and I already sent the invites, so... She let the sentence hang. My mother-in-law, who I'll call what she's always asked me to call her, which is just Mom, though my own mother is also my mom, so in my head I've always made the distinction without saying it out loud, she nodded along in that way she has. The one that means this is how it's going to be. She didn't say anything, she just nodded. My father-in-law was at the far end of the table. He was cutting his chicken. He didn't look up. I looked at Theo. He was still eating, but he'd slowed down, and he was very focused on his macaroni, the way kids get when they're listening to something they're not sure they're supposed to be listening to. Can we talk about this later? I said. We talked about it later. It didn't go anywhere. Bree's position was that she'd already sent the invites, the venue was paid for, and the kids were expecting a party. Theo's show would be recorded. We could watch it. She was sorry about the timing, but there was nothing she could do. Eli's position was that we should go to the show, which we were always going to do, and that maybe his mom and dad could split the night, come to Theo's show for the beginning, and then head to the party. His parents' position, delivered by his mother at a follow-up phone call I was not invited to, was that Piper's birthday was a family event, and they would all need to be there. I asked who all meant. She said the family. I said Theo was also family. There was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds and felt like much longer. Of course he is, she said. That's not what I meant. I didn't ask what she meant. I probably should have. Instead, I got off the phone and sat in my car in the parking lot of the Target I'd been heading into when she called. and I stayed there for a while with the engine running and the radio off. What I kept coming back to was Theo and his sticky note, the orange crayon, the little X every morning. He knew by then that the birthday party was the same night. We'd had to tell him because he'd asked why everyone looked serious at dinner, and we tried to make it small, tried to say there's a scheduling conflict, but it's not a big deal. He'd nodded like he understood. He didn't bring it up again. But I watched him cross off his days, and I watched him practice. And once, maybe 3 weeks before the show, I walked past his room late at night and heard him running lines in the dark, just whispering them to himself, and I stood in the hallway outside his door for a minute before I went back to bed. The week before the show, Eli's mother called again. This time, she wanted to know if we'd thought about bringing Theo to the party after his show was over. The party ran until 9. If his show ended by 8:30 or so, they could at least see him for a little while. I said his show would end around 8:30 and he'd be tired. She said it might be nice for Piper to have her cousin there. I said it might have been nice for Piper to have her cousin at his show. She told me I was making this harder than it needed to be. I told her I needed to go start dinner. Eli and I talked that night, really talked. Not the walking around each other version we'd been doing for weeks. He was frustrated with his family and he said so. He was also, I could tell, trying not to blow things up, because his instinct when it comes to his family has always been to smooth rather than confront, and I understood that instinct even when it drove me sideways. He'd grown up in a house where his sister was the sun and everyone else orbited, and that's not something you just recalibrate in your 30s. But he said, and I want to remember that he said this clearly without me having to ask, he said, "We're going to the show. Both of us. Whatever anyone else does." I exhaled for the first time in about 2 weeks. The night of the show, Theo woke up at 6:15 in the morning and came to find me in the kitchen. He was in his dinosaur pajamas and his hair was sticking up on one side, and he climbed onto the bar stool at the counter and said, very seriously, "Mom, it's today." "I know," I said. "How are you feeling?" He thought about it. "My stomach feels like when we drive over a big hill fast." "That's normal," I said. "That means it's real." He seemed to file that information away. I made him his usual breakfast, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, a glass of orange juice, and I watched him eat it slowly, methodically, like he was fueling up for something that mattered, which he was. Eli came down and ruffled his hair and asked him to run the soup scene one more time, and Theo rolled his eyes with the world weariness of someone who has been asked this 1,000 times, and then stood up from his bar stool and performed the entire scene, word perfect with gestures, in the kitchen, in his dinosaur pajamas. We both clapped. He bowed. Then he took his plate to the sink, rinsed it off like I'd asked him to do approximately 9,000 times, and went upstairs to get ready for school. Eli's father texted around noon. I saw it on Eli's phone when we were eating lunch together. Eli had come home to work from home that afternoon because neither of us wanted to be apart from Theo that day, which is the kind of thing you don't plan and then just happens. The text said, "We'll try to make it to the show for a little while before heading over to Breeze." Try. Eli texted back, "It starts at 7. Don't come in the middle, it'll distract him." His father texted back a thumbs up emoji. I didn't say anything. Eli looked at me and I looked at him and we just moved on. What else do you do? We got to Lincoln Elementary at 6:20. Theo was already in the back with his class, getting into costume, a simple village outfit, brown pants and a white shirt, with a little cloth cap that his teacher had made. We dropped him off with the other kids and their parents, and I'd hugged him in the hallway outside the gym, longer than usual, and he'd said, "Mom, you're wrinkling my shirt," and I'd laughed and let go. The gymnasium was filling up. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a hand-painted backdrop behind a little stage, rolling hills, a dirt road, a painted stone pot over a painted fire. Parents and grandparents and younger siblings were filing in, finding seats, pulling off coats. The room smelled like gym floor and coffee from the urn someone had set up near the door. My parents arrived at 6:40. My mother found us first, tapped me on the shoulder, kissed my cheek. My father was behind her and he shook Eli's hand and then sat down next to me and said, "Which one's his character come in from?" "Stage left," I said. "The right side if you're looking at it." He nodded and turned to look at the stage like he was orienting himself, getting his bearings. He'd driven an hour and 40 minutes from where he and my mother live in the same house I grew up in, because Theo had called him the week before to tell him about the show, and my father had said, "I'll be there," and that had been the entire conversation. At 6:52, Eli's parents walked in. I know the time because I checked my phone when I saw them, some reflex I don't fully understand. They came in together, his mother first, then his father, and they found us in the third row. We'd been saving them seats, though I hadn't decided until they actually walked in whether I was still going to wave them over. I waved. They sat down. His mother leaned across Eli to say something to me about traffic, and I nodded and said it was fine. His father sat on the other side of Eli. He didn't say much. He looked at the stage. The lights went down, and then Theo walked out. He walked out from stage left with 6 other kids, all in their village costumes, and something happened to my breathing that I've never quite been able to describe. He was just there, my kid, in his cloth cap, walking slowly and deliberately the way he'd practiced, and he looked calm. That's the thing that surprised me most. I'd expected nerves, the tight-shouldered way he gets before something big, and instead he just looked present, like he was exactly where he'd decided to be. The play started. Theo spoke his first line, something about the village not having enough, about empty cellars and hard winters, and his voice came out clear and steady, carrying all the way to the back of the gym. I heard a little ripple in the audience, people sitting up slightly, the specific surprise of realizing a 7-year-old can hold a room. My father, beside me, leaned forward just slightly. I pressed my lips together and watched my son. He was good. He was really genuinely good, not in the way that you think your own kid is good, but in the way where you look around at other parents' faces and you can see them leaning in too. He remembered every line. He hit every mark. He had this moment toward the middle of the play, where his character convinces the last reluctant villager to add her carrots to the soup, and it required him to be persuasive and warm at the same time, this complicated little emotional beat, and he did it. He just did it. At some point during the second act, I felt Eli's mother shift in her seat. I heard a quiet sound, fabric against the chair, and then in my peripheral vision I saw her lean toward Eli and murmur something. I didn't look. I kept my eyes on Theo. Then I heard the sound of people rising. Carefully, quietly, but rising. Eli's parents were leaving. Theo was mid-scene. He was doing the part where the soup is finally finished and everyone sits down together, the reconciliation scene, the heart of the whole play, and his grandparents were standing up in the third row and making their way along the edge of the gymnasium toward the door. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on Theo. I watched him spread his arms wide, the same gesture I'd seen him practice in the kitchen in his pajamas, and say the line about how there was always enough when everyone brought what they had. I watched him say it to the kid playing the baker and the kid playing the farmer's wife, and then directly out to the audience, and for just a second, his eyes scanned the crowd the way kids' eyes do when they're looking for their people. I lifted my hand, my father lifted his, Eli beside me lifted his. Theo found us. He didn't smile, he was in the middle of a scene. But something in his face settled, some small arrangement of his features, and he kept going. The play ended at 8:14. The kids took their bow. Theo was in the center, the last to bow, and when he stood back up, he was grinning so wide I could see it from the third row. This enormous, uncontrolled smile that he'd probably been holding back for the entire performance, and I was crying before I fully realized it. Just quietly, in my seat, in the dark between the end of the bow and the lights coming up, my father pressed a folded paper napkin into my hand from out of nowhere, and I held it against my face and breathed. When the lights came up and the kids started coming out from backstage to find their families, I found Theo in about 4 seconds because he was looking for me at the same time. He actually ran, across the gymnasium floor in his little cloth cap and his village costume and hit me approximately at chest height, and I held on. "Did you see the soup scene?" he said into my shoulder. "I saw it every second," I said. My father got down on one knee on the gym floor, which I know cost him something because he's 63 and his knees aren't what they were, and he pulled Theo into a hug that lasted a while. When he stood back up, he put his hand on Theo's cap and said, "I drove from home for this and I'd drive it twice." Theo's face. I'm glad I was looking at his face when my father said that. We went to dinner afterward, my parents, Eli, Theo, and me, at a diner about half a mile from the school. A 24-hour place with a neon sign and laminated menus and booths with red vinyl seats. Theo ordered a grilled cheese and a chocolate milkshake because it was a special occasion and I told him so. My father ordered the same thing in solidarity. They sat across from each other in the booth, and Theo talked almost without stopping, recounting the whole play from his perspective, explaining what was happening backstage before each entrance, what Ms. Tara Kellerman had said, how nervous Olivia, the girl playing the baker, had been before her first line, how the stone soup pot was actually a prop that one of the dads had made out of papier-mâché and painted gray, and it was extremely realistic. Eli was quiet through most of dinner. Not a heavy quiet, just the kind that comes from processing something. I reached under the table and put my hand over his, and he turned his palm up and held on. His phone had a text from his mother at 8:45. How did it go? He answered, he was amazing. Are you at the party? She said, yes, just got here. Piper is having the best time. He put his phone face down on the table. The next morning, a Saturday, Eli called his father. I was in the kitchen with Theo. We were making pancakes, and Theo was very focused on the task of pouring batter into perfect circles, which is harder than it sounds. And I could hear Eli's voice from the other room, low and even, the way he sounds when he's saying something real. I didn't try to hear the words. I just poured coffee and helped Theo with the batter. Eli came into the kitchen about 20 minutes later and got himself a mug. He didn't say anything right away. Theo held up a very lopsided pancake for assessment, and Eli told him it was great. After Theo took his plate to the table, Eli said quietly, I told him it wasn't okay, that they should have stayed. What did he say? He said he was sorry, that he'd been thinking about it since last night. He paused. He said he could see Theo looking for them. I set down my coffee. He said he saw Theo scan the audience and he washed his face when he found us instead of them. Eli was looking at the counter. He said he's going to call Theo this week, that he wants to take him somewhere. Just the two of them. It wasn't the apology that got me, though it helped. It was the specific detail of it, that my father-in-law had watched my son's face in that moment, had seen it and understood what it meant, and had sat with that knowledge through an entire birthday party and then admitted it out loud the next morning. That's not nothing. That's actually something. It doesn't fix what they did, and I don't think I'm pretending it does. Theo didn't ask where Grandma and Grandpa went after the show. He was in his own joy, surrounded by his people, and either he didn't notice when they left or he decided not to say. He's 7. He's also, I have come to understand, more perceptive than I sometimes remember, and he has his own way of filing things away and returning to them when he's ready. There are things I want to say to my sister-in-law that I haven't said yet. I don't know if I'll say them. I know that Piper's party was lovely and that she turned 6 and that none of that is Piper's fault. And I know that birthday parties matter and that you can build a case for Bree's choices that doesn't make her a monster. She wanted her daughter's birthday to be a big family event. That's not a villainous desire. But there was a moment, and this is the thing I keep returning to. There was a moment 6 weeks before the show when I told her about the conflict, and she said it's just a school play. And Theo was sitting right there eating his macaroni and cheese, and she said it in front of him. Whether she registered that or not, I don't know. Whether Theo registered it, I also don't know for certain. What I know is that he crossed off every box on that sticky note. All 109 days. He did not miss a single morning. The sticky note is still on the refrigerator. He hasn't taken it down. I don't know if he's waiting for something or if he just forgot about it, and I haven't asked, because some things you let sit. Last Tuesday, he came home from school with a paper in his backpack folded in thirds. He dropped his bag on the floor by the door the way he always does, which I've asked him not to do approximately 1,000 times, and he said, very casually, as he was heading to the kitchen for his snack, Miss Smottery, Kellerman says we're doing a winter show too. I picked up his bag and hung it on the hook. Yeah? There's a sign-up sheet, he said, for people who want parts. Are you going to sign up? He was already at the refrigerator, pulling out the apple slices I'd cut earlier, and he looked back at me over his shoulder with his father's dark eyes and that 40-year-old face of his. I already did, he said. I keep thinking about the sticky note. 109 days, crossed off one by one in orange crayon every morning before breakfast, by a 7-year-old who didn't know yet that some people in his life would decide a trampoline park mattered more. What I've learned, slowly and not without some pain, is that the choices people make when nothing is forcing them reveal something permanent about who they are. Nobody made my in-laws leave during the soup scene. Nobody held a gun to my sister-in-law's head when she said, "It's just a school play," in front of my son. Those were free choices, made in full comfort, and free choices in full comfort are the truest thing about a person. And then there's my father. He didn't make a speech. He didn't post anything. He drove an hour and 40 minutes on a Friday night, sat in a folding chair in an elementary school gymnasium, and when Theo bowed at the end, my dad got down on one knee on that gym floor. 63 years old, bad knees, and he held his grandson and said what he said. That was also a free choice. That's also who he is. I think about what Theo is absorbing through all of this, even the parts he doesn't mention. Kids are not blank. They are watching, filing, building a map of the world based on who shows up and who doesn't, who says one thing and does another, who drives an hour and 40 minutes, and who sends a thumbs up emoji. Theo may not have the words for any of it yet, but somewhere underneath the grilled cheese and the milkshake and the retelling of the papier-mâché soup pot, he is learning something about what he is worth to different people. I can't control that lesson. I can only make sure that when he looks out into the audience of his life, there are faces there that he recognizes. What I want for him, what I am trying, imperfectly, to model, is that he grows up knowing the difference between what's right and what's convenient, and that he chooses what's right even when it costs him something. My father could have sent a card. Nobody would have blamed him. He came anyway. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not the stated version, not the of course family comes first at Sunday dinner, but the getting in the car at 5:30 on a Friday and driving north in traffic because you said you'd be there. I also want him to know that persistence isn't about grand gestures. It's about crossing off one box at a time. 11 weeks of bathtub rehearsals and kitchen performances. That's the thing nobody sees. The accumulation of small, unglamorous effort that makes one clear moment possible. Theo didn't get to deliver his lines steady and true because he was talented. He got there because he worked. I want him to keep knowing that. I want him to carry it forward into every hard thing he tries. And I want him to be wise enough eventually to recognize the difference between the people who show up in folding chairs and the people who send thumbs up emojis, and to build his life accordingly with the kind of quiet clarity that doesn't require bitterness, just honesty. He already signed up for the winter show. I think he's going to be okay.